All right. Now we are going to go over, if it gives you the graph, how to find the equation of the graph. So this is chapter 9, equations of sine and cosine graphs. So let's review. Let's review a couple things. We have, let's see, we can have a sine of theta or x graph, and we can have cosine of theta or x graph. And our sine, we said sine starts at the midline. So that's how we're going to remember that one. Sine midline. So sine starts at the midline. If it has a positive a value, it's going to start at the midline and go up to the maximum, back down to the minimum. Sorry, midline, then down to the minimum, and then back to the midline. And these will be the 5 points we'll want to name. If we have a negative a value, we'll still start at the midline. Sine starts at the midline, and we will start going down. So we'll hit the minimum, and then back to the midline, and then up to the maximum, and then back down to the midline. So sine starts at the midline. Cosine. For cosine, we start with a positive a value. We start at the max. Go down to the midline, go down to the minimum, back to the midline, and here's our maximum. Those would be the 5 points we want to label. And if we were to graph a cosine with a negative a value, this time we start at the minimum and then go to the midline and then maximum, midline, back down to the minimum. So that should kind of help you see what your graph should look like if you're graphing based on if it's a sine or a cosine and if the a value is positive or negative. And so today we're going to look at, if we are looking at a graph, how do we tell if it is negative or positive? Just a reminder, the graphs are y equals, or sorry, the parent equations for the graphs are y equals sine, a sine bx, sorry, it's been a long day, saying weird things, plus d. For cosine, it's y equals a times the cosine of b times x plus d. For both of them, your a is the amplitude. The b value is going to be equal to 2 pi over the period. We also said the period could be equal to 2 pi over b. They have that inverse relationship where b times the period equals 2 pi. So either one. And then we said d is the midline. For either of these. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to plot a graph. Let's say it gave us this graph. This one starts up here at a maximum of 0, 2. It goes down to pi, 0. Then the minimum down here is going to be 2 pi, negative 2. My next point is 3 pi, 0. And my next point is 4 pi, 2. And these are all connected. All right, and my direction is right to the equation. First thing I'm going to do, is this a sine or a cosine graph? So let's look at the shape. Starts at a maximum and then goes down. Which one of these starts at the maximum? Well, sine starts at the midline. And so cosine can either start at a max or a minimum. This one starts at the max with a positive a value. So I know this is going to be a cosine graph. All right, so it's going to look something like this. Y equals a times the cosine of bx plus d. So now I got to figure out my a value, my b value, my d value. How do I figure those out? Well, let's see. We could start with the amplitude. The amplitude is going to be the part from the maximum to the midline or the minimum to the midline, that distance. So I could just do any point. My midline is at y equals 0. My maximum is at y equals 2. So what's that distance? It's 2. It's the same between here and here. And it's the same between here and here. The distance between 0 and -2 is 2. So my A value is 2. And I could even color code that. That's helpful. That, which is the same as that distance, which is the same as that distance, is going to be A equals 2. Okay, how do we know? Let's do the next easy one, the D, the midline. Well, my midline is going to be right where it crosses over, and that is, it happens to be at 0, so that's nice. D equals 0. How do I find that? Well, wherever this line is, and it'll give it to you by the y values of the points on that line. That's going to be your D value. Then I need to find my B. My B value is going to be 2 pi over my period. Now, my period is going to be how long it takes for me to restart my graph again. So I could go from any maximum to any maximum and take that distance. Here we've been lucky so far because we've been only working with 0, but at some point we're going to get something that doesn't start where x equals 0. We'll have to find the period. So here my period is going to be, it's going to be 4 pi minus 0, that distance, which is 4 pi. So what is my B value? Well, that's going to be 2 pi over 4 pi, my period. 2 pi over 4 pi, that cancels out. 2 over 4 is 1/2. So my B value is 1/2. And we'll highlight that in green. There's my period. And that's how I get my B value down there. All right, so now I'm just writing my graph. Y equals 2 cosine B, which is 1/2, so 1/2 x plus 0. Cool, let's write over it. Let's see if I already did this one. This one. This one also starts at a maximum. No, let's do a sine one. Let's do this one. It starts at the midline. So it's a sine graph. It starts at the midline. And then it's going to give me a maximum. So it's going to be a positive A value because it starts at the midline and goes up. All right, what are the points that it gives me for this one? It gives me that this is 0, 0. It gives me this is pi over 8, 3. This is pi over 4, 0. This is 3 pi over 8, -3. And this is pi over 2, 0. And my direction, again, is to write an equation. So my first step, I want to know if it's sine or cosine. And again, I'm starting at the midline, so it's sine. I start at the midline, and then I go up. So it's a positive sine graph. So I'm going to have y equals a times the sine of bx plus d. All right, let's figure out my A value. So between my midline and my maximum, that one blue again, it's going to be same here and here. That distance is going to be 3 and 3. The distance between 3 minus 0 is 3. So my A value, which is 3 minus 0, is 3. My D value is going to be the midline. This one also is at 0. You can tell by the Y values right there. So my D is 0. And then my B value, that's the one where B equals 2 pi over the period. Well, my period is going to be this distance, how long it took to complete one full cycle, and that happens to be pi over 2 minus 0. That distance was pi over 2 distance. So my period is pi over 2. So again, I'm going to have my b value is going to be 2 pi over 2. If I were to multiply both the top and bottom by 2, which is just a big 1, I get on the top, I get 4 pi. On the bottom, I get over pi, which is going to be 4. My b value is 4. Again, there's my period, pi over 2. All right, now I create my graph. Y equals 3 times the sine of, my b value is 4, 4x plus my d value is 0. All right, ready for another one? Okay, I'm going to give you a challenge one this time. And again, your direction again is to write an equation. And let's do this one. Let's say, okay, here's our graph. There's 0, but our midline this time is going to be at -2. And this one starts at the midline, so what's it going to be? And then goes down, midline, goes up, and then back to the midline. And then the 5 points it gives you are right here. We're at 0, -2. This one is 3 pi over 4, -5. My point, it actually doesn't give me that point, but it gives me this point, which is 9 pi over 4, 1. And then this point, it doesn't give me that point either, but it does give me my next minimum point, which is right here, which is 15 pi over 4, -5. So you can look and see this one gave me more than just one period. One full period would have been from here to here. But guess what's also a full period? Here to here. Between here and here is one period, but I don't have that point. I know this is 0. I don't have that point. To find the period, I can also do this distance between any point on the graph and the next point in that graph when the graph's repeating itself. So this distance is going to be the same as this distance. And this one I have. So that's how I can find my period. Let's see what else do I need to know. It starts at the midline, so it's going to be a sine graph. And it starts at the midline, it's sine, and it goes down. So it's going to have a negative a value. So my equation is going to be y equals -a sine times bx plus d. So now let's see. Now I just need to find my distances. My amplitude is going to be right here. I actually don't know the midline, so I need to know the midline to find the amplitude too. Well, I know that my maximum is 1 and my minimum is -5. So I need to know the midway point between 1 and -5, and that's going to be my midline. If I don't see that right away, I can add them together and divide by 2 to find the average. So I could do 1 plus -5 divided by 2. 1 plus -5 is -4. Divided by 2 is -2. So that line right here that it didn't give me, I guess it kind of did right there, is -2. Didn't give me those points, but I know that midline is -2. So I actually know, okay, write that right here. D is equal to -2. And my A value is going to be the difference between 1 and -2. So my A is going to be 1 minus -2, which is 1 plus 2, which is 3. And that's the same distance between -2 and -5 is 3. So it's that distance. So my A value is 3. Now my B value. Yeah, my B will be equal to 2 pi over the period. And I need to know my period here. My period is going to be this distance. So if I take the bigger one, 15 pi over 4, and I subtract 3 pi over 4, that's my period. How long was that distance? Well, 15 pi minus, they're both over the same denominator, so I can do easy subtraction. It's going to be something over 4. 15 pi minus 3 pi would be 12 pi over 4. Well, that can be reduced. 12 over 4 is 3. So 12 pi over 4 is 3 pi. All right, so my period is now 3 pi. So my B value is going to be 2 pi over 3 pi. The bi's cancel. My B value is just 2 over 3. Again, that was my period right down there, 3 pi. Okay, so I have my A, my D, and my B. Here's my graph, or my equation. So I'm going to have y equals -3 sine times 2/3 x minus 2. There you go.